The morning sun cast its rays across eastern Burkina Faso, painting the landscape in shimmering shades of gold and blue. The sky stretched endlessly, crystal clear and unblemished, while a gentle coolness lingered in the air. A fine layer of dust covered the ground, disturbed occasionally by the morning breeze that whispered through the sparse vegetation. President Ibrahim Traoré stood beside his sleek black SUV, a steaming cup of tea cradled in his hands. The vapor rose lazily into the cool morning air, dissipating like the concerns that momentarily clouded his mind. Today was meant to be special, a visit to a rural youth center where hundreds of young people awaited the arrival of their nation's most important guest with eager anticipation. From the village square, the rhythmic beating of drums and the melodious strains of traditional songs floated through the air, creating an atmosphere of celebration and hope. The entire community seemed to pulse with excitement, their joy manifesting in music that spoke of pride and possibility. Yet amid this anticipation, a problem had emerged. The presidential convoy was running significantly behind schedule. On President Traoré's face, the familiar expression of quiet seriousness settled. The same look that always preceded difficult decisions. The countenance of a leader weighing options with the gravity they deserved. It was then that a tall, lean figure approached with confident strides. Idrissa, the president's close advisor, moved forward with eyes that sparkled with conviction and lips curved in a smile that suggested he held the solution to their dilemma. "Sir," Idrissa began with appropriate deference, "if we take the main road, we'll be 2 hours late. But there's a shortcut straight through the forest. Completely quiet, no towns, just a direct route. We can reach there in just 40 minutes. President Traoré raised an eyebrow slightly, his expression thoughtful but guarded. "The route is safe," Idrissa continued quickly, reading the unspoken question in his leader's eyes. "Yes, we conducted a clearance operation just yesterday. I personally supervised it. Everything is secure." From his position near the rear vehicles, a bodyguard named Karim stepped forward hesitantly. His face betrayed visible concern, worry lines creasing his forehead as he spoke in a low, cautious tone. "Sir, that route is very isolated. I don't have a good feeling about it," but Idrissa cut him off with practiced ease. "Sir, fuel is also limited and the young people are waiting. We shouldn't delay any further." For several long moments, President Traoré stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon as if he could see all possible outcomes stretching before him like paths in the wilderness. He was a man accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives, and he approached each choice with the weight it deserved. Finally, drawing a deep breath, he spoke with quiet authority. "All right, take the shortcut." The order given, the convoy sprang into motion. The formation was strategic and deliberate. 2 armed trucks in front, the president's SUV in the center, and 2 more trucks bringing up the rear. As the convoy entered the forest's rough pathway, the world around them transformed completely. The road narrowed and became uneven, rutted with deep grooves and scattered stones. On both sides, tall dry bushes and wild grasses formed natural walls that seemed to close in around them. An eerie silence pervaded the forest. No birdsong broke the quiet. No animal sounds disturbed the stillness. There were no houses, no farms, no smoke rising from cooking fires. Only an oppressive, heavy silence that pressed down on the occupants of the vehicles like a physical weight. Time passed slowly. After half an hour, the atmosphere began to lighten somewhat. The tension visible on the soldiers' faces eased fractionally. The driver increased speed slightly, and even President Traoré's gaze softened as he looked out the window with what seemed like cautious relief. Then, as if time itself had frozen, an extraordinary scene brought the entire convoy to a complete halt. In the middle of the road stood a large brown cow. One of its horns was broken, and in its eyes lay a depth that seemed almost unnaturally aware. There was no fear in its stance, no nervousness in its demeanor. The animal's gaze was fixed directly on the presidential vehicle with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Its hooves were planted firmly in the ground, as if it had made an irrevocable decision not to move. The driver pressed the horn repeatedly. No reaction. The lead truck used its loudspeaker to shout, "Clear the road!" But the cow remained as immovable as stone, as if rooted to that precise spot by forces beyond understanding. A soldier raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The gunshot echoed through the trees, reverberating in the stillness. Yet the cow didn't even flinch. Not so much as a blink acknowledged the explosive sound. Confusion rippled through the convoy. What kind of situation was this? How could an animal display such inexplicable behavior? "It's just a cow," one soldier muttered in bewilderment. "Just move it aside," another suggested with growing impatience. Two soldiers dismounted cautiously with long sticks in hand, approaching the animal with wariness. They attempted to push the cow backward. It retreated a few steps, then turned and returned to exactly the same spot, as if declaring with silent certainty, "This is my place. You shall not pass." President Traoré, observing all of this from inside his SUV, felt his curiosity transform into something deeper, an instinct honed by years of leadership and survival. His eyes narrowed with sudden intensity, and his brow furrowed with concern that transcended mere inconvenience. He rolled down his window and issued a command in a firm, unwavering voice that brooked no argument. "Check the ground." Idrissa looked startled, confusion evident on his features. "Sir, it's just a cow." The president's voice became steel. "I said, check the ground." This was the moment that would alter the entire trajectory of the story that was unfolding, the pivot point upon which survival would turn. The soldiers, following their president's orders, moved forward with extreme caution, and strange, profound silence had descended upon the scene, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The two soldiers kept their rifles at the ready, fingers near triggers, as they crouched near the cow to examine the ground around it. The soil beneath the dried grass felt soft and recently disturbed, as if someone had deliberately concealed something beneath the surface. One soldier called out with growing alarm, "Sir, there's something here!" He knelt down and began carefully scraping away the loose earth. His fingers suddenly encountered cold metal hidden beneath the dirt. Bending closer, he discovered a thin but sturdy metal wire buried in the ground, its surface still gleaming, not old, not weathered, but recently placed. His heart began to pound with the terrible realization of what they had stumbled upon. In a voice trembling with fear and adrenaline, the soldier reported, "Sir, this metal wire—" "It's not from anything ordinary." Karim, the chief guard standing near the presidential vehicle, immediately moved forward. He gently pulled the wire upward to examine its end, then cast an expert eye along its length. The wire disappeared in both directions, buried beneath the earth in a pattern that spoke of deliberate, professional placement. "It continues," Karim announced, gesturing with his hand for two more soldiers to join him. Together, they crouched low and began following the wire's path through the soil. Seconds later, one soldier's face turned ashen as the color drained from his features. "Sir," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of mortal danger, "this wire isn't connected to just one device. It's linked to 3 landmines." The fear in his voice was palpable, and it sent a chill through everyone present. The realization of how close they had come to death, how one more meter of forward movement would have, triggered catastrophic destruction, settled over the convoy like a suffocating blanket. Idrissa's complexion turned pale as chalk. He stammered quickly, attempting to deflect. "Sir, this must be an old enemy trap, something left over from previous conflicts." But Karim immediately countered, his voice sharp with certainty born of experience. "This is not an old trap, sir. Look here, the soil is still loose. Someone placed these mines yesterday or even this morning. This is fresh." President Traoré drew a deep, measured breath. His eyes, sharp and penetrating, locked onto Idrissa's face with an intensity that made the advisor visibly uncomfortable. The president's voice, when he spoke, was cold as winter ice. "The timing of our departure, our route. Who knew all of these details?" Karim bent down for a closer examination of the area surrounding the wire. There, in the fresh dust, was a clear boot print, pressed lightly but distinctly into the soil. He pointed at the impression with his finger, his voice grim. "This footprint belongs to military boots, and it's completely fresh, made within the last day. Idrissa, now visibly sweating despite the cool morning air, spoke hastily. "Sir, perhaps the enemy placed this thinking that anyone might use this route." President Traoré's piercing gaze never wavered. "But this route was your suggestion, Idrissa. You were the one who insisted so strongly that this path was safe. You said you personally supervised the clearance." Throughout this tense exchange, the cow remained perfectly still. Its deep, calm eyes seemed to observe everything, as if aware of the drama unfolding around it, yet maintaining an air of mysterious purpose. The animal showed no fear, made no attempt to flee, as if it existed in that precise location for a reason that transcended human understanding. The soldiers immediately cordoned off the entire area with military precision. Radio messages were dispatched, and within minutes, additional forces arrived from a nearby unit. Every vehicle was ordered to remain stationary. Bomb disposal experts were summoned to defuse the deadly devices that had been so carefully concealed. When the specialists arrived and began their meticulous examination, they discovered that each landmine had been hidden with extraordinary skill. The placement, the concealment, the triggering mechanism all spoke of advanced military training. These were not crude, improvised explosives, but sophisticated weapons that only highly trained personnel or experienced mine experts could have deployed so effectively. The specialists' assessment was chilling. One wrong step would have obliterated the entire convoy. The president, his guards, his advisors, none would have survived. The blast radius and the strategic placement ensured maximum casualties. President Traoré exited his vehicle and began a careful inspection of the scene. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the cow that had become the inadvertent savior of his life. Stopping a few paces away, he looked into the animal's eyes as if seeking answers to unspoken questions. "Who are you? Why did you stand here? What force guided you to this spot at this precise moment?" The cow simply blinked, maintaining its serene composure as if guarding ancient secrets. Karim approached the president quietly and spoke in a voice filled with profound realization. "Sir, if this cow hadn't blocked our path, we would have driven directly over those mines." President Traoré nodded slowly, the weight of survival heavy upon him. "Yes, and I probably wouldn't be standing here today." Idrissa had retreated slightly, standing apart from the group, but his hands trembled visibly. President Traoré's gaze returned to him, and this time the suspicion in his eyes had intensified dramatically, sharpened by the undeniable evidence of betrayal. "Search the entire area thoroughly," the president commanded in a voice that carried across the clearing. "Leave no detail uninvestigated." Then, turning to Karim, he added with deliberate emphasis, "And don't let Idrissa communicate with anyone." A heavy atmosphere descended upon the scene. The silence of the forest, the death hidden in the dust, and the mysterious cow standing in the middle of the road all combined to create a tableau that seemed beyond the realm of ordinary experience. President Traoré knew with absolute certainty that this was no mere coincidence, no random occurrence. Someone had known the timing of his departure, his intended route, and even the precise moment he would pass through this isolated stretch of forest. The precision of the planning spoke of insider knowledge, of betrayal from within his own circle. The sun had climbed higher in the sky by now, but the cold sensation that had settled over the forest clearing remained, despite the growing heat of the day. Even after the immediate danger of the landmines had been neutralized by the experts, an atmosphere of tension and unease persisted. President Ibrahim Traoré stood among his convoy, but his attention kept returning to one person, Idrissa, who just hours earlier had urged the shortcut with such confidence and insistence. The advisor, now drenched in perspiration despite the morning coolness, stood with his eyes alternately fixed on the ground or darting nervously in all directions. His hands repeatedly moved toward his pockets, as if trying to hide something or seeking comfort in a familiar gesture. "Idrissa," the president called out suddenly in a commanding voice. The advisor flinched and straightened immediately. "Yes, sir? Who suggested this route?" The president's tone was deceptively calm. "The quiet before a storm, I did, sir," Idrissa answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. And you said you personally supervised the clearance operation? Yes, sir, I did. President Traoré remained silent for several long moments, his penetrating gaze never leaving Idrissa's face. Then he turned to Karim and issued a command that sent a clear message to everyone present. Don't let him speak to anyone. Karim immediately signaled, and two armed soldiers stepped forward. A wave of shock and fear washed visibly across Idrissa's features, his composure cracking under the weight of accusation. Sir, what's happening? I haven't done anything wrong. His voice carried desperation tinged with panic. The president's response was delivered in a tone as cold as mountain ice. A cow saved my life and you brought me to this road. I want to know why. The soldiers immediately gripped Idrissa firmly by both arms and escorted him to a vehicle at the rear of the convoy. His protests and denials faded into the dusty air, swallowed by the enormity of what had been discovered. Several hours later, the convoy arrived in the capital city and proceeded directly to intelligence headquarters, an imposing structure where monitors lined the walls, lights blinked continuously, and heavily armed guards maintained vigilant watch over every entrance and corridor. Idrissa was shown to a plain but sterile interrogation room. A single table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner, nothing more. Sekou, the head of intelligence operations, entered with the bearing of a man whose experience had etched seriousness into every feature. He sat across from the increasingly nervous advisor, opened a file folder with deliberate slowness, and spoke without preamble. Idrissa, we want to know about all your activities over the past week. I haven't done anything wrong, Idrissa protested, though his voice lacked conviction, trembling with underlying fear. Sekou smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and reached beneath the table to retrieve a remote control. He pressed a button, and the wall-mounted screen illuminated with damning clarity. The video was grainy, but clear enough. Nighttime, an isolated location, and Idrissa standing before another man. The stranger wore military boots, his face covered by a cap, and in his hand was a small satellite phone, the kind used for communications that couldn't be traced through normal channels. The video showed the phone being handed to Idrissa, followed by a brief conversation before the two men departed in opposite directions, the color drained from Idrissa's face as he watched. His own betrayal displayed before him. This was just a coincidence, he began weakly. Sekou placed the same satellite phone on the table between them with a soft thud. That seemed thunderous in the quiet room. This phone was found under your car seat this morning. You forgot to destroy it. Idrissa's lips began to quiver uncontrollably. Words tumbled out in a rush of confession and justification. They said they only wanted to scare the president, not kill him. They promised. Who are they? Sekou interrupted, his eyes narrowing dangerously. I don't know their names, Idrissa admitted, lowering his gaze to the table. They gave me money, made promises, said that if Traoré continued talking about a united Africa, Western interests would be destroyed. They said powerful forces couldn't allow that vision to take root. Sekou's voice dripped with contempt. So you sold out your country. For a few $1,000s and out of fear, you betrayed everything. Idrissa fell silent. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the table, each drop marking the seconds of his shame and the collapse of whatever justifications he had constructed for himself. Outside the interrogation room, President Ibrahim Traoré stood listening to every word through the audio feed. His face showed a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. This was someone he had trusted for years, someone who had stood by his side through difficult times and now revealed as an enemy agent, a pawn in a much larger game. The president knew with certainty that Idrissa was merely the first thread to unravel. The real web of conspiracy extended far beyond one frightened advisor. There were more faces hidden in the shadows, faces that smiled at him daily, shook his hand warmly, and all the while prepared daggers to plant in his back. The dust had barely settled from Idrissa's interrogation when President Ibrahim Traoré summoned Sekou and his closest confidants to an emergency meeting. The location wasn't the usual conference room, but a highly secure chamber deep within the palace, a room where mobile signals couldn't penetrate. Windows were sealed, and steel reinforcement lined the walls to prevent any form of electronic eavesdropping. The president's tone was direct and uncompromising. Idrissa has confessed, but I'm certain he wasn't acting alone. Information about this route, the timing of our convoy, every security detail, all of it was leaked systematically. We have a network of traitors, not just one frightened man. Sekou responded in his deep, gravelly voice. Sir, we've tasked our cybersecurity unit to examine the data from every vehicle in the convoy. If any hidden devices or trackers were planted, they'll find them immediately. Hours passed in tense anticipation. Then a young officer entered the room carrying a file folder, his face bearing an expression of seriousness mixed with barely concealed shock. Sir, we've found a small black tracker device in the lead vehicle. This device has been transmitting the real-time location and movements of our entire convoy to an external server, likely outside the country. Complete silence fell over the room like a physical weight. Every person present understood the implications. Their security had been completely compromised, their movements monitored continuously. President Traoré's voice was steel when he spoke. How did this device get there? The officer opened his file with hands that trembled slightly. Sir, the work belongs to Lieutenant Domba. He's been serving in the palace for 6 years. Everyone trusted him completely. He was considered beyond reproach. He paused, then delivered the crushing detail. He installed this device 3 days ago. Sekou slammed his fist on the table, the sound explosive in the quiet room. Domba. I never would have thought he could... His voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought that betrayal could run so deep. Arrest him immediately, the president ordered without hesitation. Within minutes, Domba was apprehended from within the palace grounds. He was an average-built man of quiet demeanor, someone who always spoke softly, never argued, never drew attention to himself, the perfect profile for a deep-cover operative. When he was seated in the interrogation chair, his face showed neither fear nor shame, only an eerie, calm acceptance. Sekou placed a file in front of him. You installed this? Domba smiled faintly, almost with relief. Yes, I installed it. President Traoré cut directly to the heart of the matter. For whom? For a company. A security company that operates throughout Africa. Domba hesitated briefly, then continued. The Longlate Group. They're connected to American interests. Everyone in the room reacted with shock. The Longlate Group wasn't an unknown entity. Their name had surfaced repeatedly in connection with various rebellions and covert operations across the African continent. They were mercenaries, guns for hire, operating in the shadows of international politics. What did they promise you? The president asked, his voice carefully controlled. Domba lowered his eyes. Money, a new passport? A country where no one would ever recognize me, where I could disappear and start fresh, free from the consequences of what I'd done. Sekou's voice rose with righteous anger. And in exchange, you sold out your president, your country, your people, everything that should have meant something to you. Domba spoke quietly, almost meditatively. I thought it was just a job, just intelligence gathering. But now, perhaps I made the wrong choice. President Traoré watched him in silence. There was no visible anger on the president's face, but his eyes held such fierce intensity that the room's atmosphere grew even more oppressive, the weight of judgment palpable. Sekou turned to the president. Sir, this means we're not dealing with a local or temporary plot. This is an international operation involving military contractors, espionage networks, and political interests at the highest levels, forces that span continents and operate with virtually unlimited resources. The president spoke softly, but his words carried undeniable conviction. And the purpose of this operation is singular: to remove me and destabilize the nation, to prove that African leaders who resist cannot survive. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace lawn where people moved about as if everything were normal. But he knew that behind these walls, a silent war was being waged, a war fought not with bullets and bombs, but with deception, bribery, and covert manipulation. Turning back to face everyone in the room, His voice rang with determination. "We will settle accounts with all of them. But the first step is to clean our own house thoroughly. Anyone, no matter how close they may be, if they're involved in treason, their fate must serve as a lesson for everyone else. No one is above accountability." Sekou nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." Domba was led from the room, his footsteps gradually fading into distant corridors. But his confession had painted a clear picture in the president's mind, a web extending far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, connecting to powers that viewed his vision of African unity as an existential threat to their interests. President Traoré understood that if this web was to be broken, he couldn't simply defend against attacks. He would need to go on the offensive to expose the players in this deadly game, and to demonstrate that African sovereignty wasn't merely an ideal, but a reality defended by determination and unity. The evening in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, felt different from ordinary nights. Light clouds drifted across the sky, and throughout the city's streets and neighborhoods, an atmosphere of anticipation hung in the air like static. Electricity before a storm. Government, television, and radio stations had announced that President Ibrahim Traoré would address the nation directly at 8:00 p.m. Following this announcement, people began gathering in homes, cafes, and tea houses throughout the country. Families clustered around televisions. Young people streamed the broadcast on their phones and in village squares. Large screens were erected so entire communities could watch together. Inside the palace, a large hall had been prepared with cameras positioned strategically. The lighting was arranged to ensure that the president's eyes and the gravity of his demeanor would be clearly visible to every viewer. Sekou, Karim, and the media team stood quietly in the background, understanding that this address would be far from ordinary. It would be a bombshell announcement that would reverberate across the nation and beyond. Finally, the appointed time arrived. Television screens across the country displayed the president's image. He sat upright in his military uniform, the national flag badge gleaming on his chest. His eyes were fixed directly on the camera lens, creating the impression that he was speaking personally to each individual viewer. He drew a deep breath and began speaking in a tone that was measured yet powerful, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "My fellow citizens, this week an assassination attempt was made against me. This was not an attack on a battlefield. This was not a rebellion by armed insurgents. This attack was orchestrated by people who wear suits, who smile, who shake our hands while standing beside us, and then plant landmines on our roads to destroy us." His words echoed through living rooms, cafes, and public squares. Across the nation, hearts began beating faster as the gravity of his revelation settled upon listeners. They planned my convoy's route. They attempted to buy my security personnel. They laid such elaborate traps that if not for an innocent animal, yes, a cow, stopping our path, I would not be standing before you today. In the broadcast hall, even some cameramen looked surprised. The president continued with a slight smile touching his lips. "Yes, a cow saved my life. But the real point isn't the cow itself. The real point is that because of this cow, we identified the traitors who were among us, people we trusted, people who had access to our most sensitive information and used it to serve foreign masters." The president's tone hardened, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "I want to tell the world today that Burkina Faso is not a chess piece in anyone's game. We are not puppets, not slaves to foreign interests. I am announcing that every foreign military base, every agent, and every contractor involved in covert conspiracies against our nation must leave our soil within the next 72 hours. These words electrified the nation. In streets and squares, people began congratulating each other spontaneously. Some started chanting slogans of support. The wave of national pride and defiance was palpable and contagious. The president pulled a paper from his pocket. "I have their names. I've seen their messages. I've read their secret plans. And I promise you, not only will I survive, but I will expose every single one of them. The world will know who tried to murder an African president for daring to speak of African unity and sovereignty." The camera moved closer, capturing the intensity in his eyes, the look of a man who had faced death and emerged not diminished, but strengthened. "We are the children of Africa. We cannot be suppressed. We do not live in fear. We are people who believe in our land, in nature, and in the strength of our own people. Those who thought they could eliminate an African leader with their schemes and weapons have learned that we are not so easily destroyed. When the address concluded, he stood and faced the national flag. The national anthem began playing in the background, and the screen gradually faded to black. Within moments of the broadcast ending, social media exploded with reactions. Young people shared the president's photos, created sketches of the heroic cow, and the hashtag #CowOfResistance began trending across multiple platforms. Artists painted murals of the cow on walls throughout cities. Poets composed verses celebrating the strange miracle. Children reenacted the scene in schoolyards, taking turns playing the cow that stood fearlessly in the road. But this public enthusiasm was only one dimension of the response. Across borders in European and American embassies, alarm bells were ringing. Intelligence reports began noting that Burkina Faso's president wasn't just surviving assassination attempts, he was transforming each conspiracy into a public relations victory, turning defensive survival into offensive exposure of foreign interference. Inside the palace, Sekou and Karim reported that surveillance of foreign military installations throughout the country had intensified. Some had already begun preparations to withdraw. Others remained ominously silent, as if waiting for something, perhaps planning one final desperate move. President Traoré issued a simple statement that captured his understanding of the situation. They think the game is over, but the real war is only beginning now, and this time we fight on our terms. Only 5 days had passed since the president's explosive televised address when new intelligence reached the palace. A foreign peace delegation was en route to Burkina Faso. Officially, they were coming to improve diplomatic relations and restore confidence between nations, standard diplomatic language that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. The delegation consisted of 4 members, 2 Europeans, 1 American, and a representative from a Middle Eastern nation. They carried expensive gifts, wore practiced smiles, and spoke eloquently of peace and friendship. But President Ibrahim Traoré had already received advance intelligence that this meeting would extend far beyond pleasant diplomatic conversation. Sekou's covert intelligence team had delivered a message 3 days prior, its content chilling in its directness. "Sir, these people are more assassins than diplomats." The scheduled meeting day arrived. The palace conference room had been formally prepared with appropriate diplomatic courtesies. A long table was set with gleaming glasses, coffee service, and teacups. The national flags of Burkina Faso and the visiting nations hung side by side on the wall, standard protocol for such occasions. Outside, military units stood at heightened alert, while inside the room, an atmosphere of forced civility and underlying tension prevailed. The delegation entered the conference room with professional composure. The time for handshakes arrived, that moment of ritual greeting that defines diplomatic encounters. President Traoré shook hands with each member in turn, but his eyes never stopped their careful examination. He watched their fingers, their wrists, their sleeves with the attention of a predator assessing potential threats. His particular focus settled on the American representative, who wore a thick metallic bracelet on his wrist. The accessory seemed unusually substantial, not the kind of ornamental jewelry typically worn to diplomatic meetings. The president had been briefed about this specific detail, and now seeing it in person confirmed his intelligence reports. At that precise moment, Sekou gave a subtle signal. The door burst open with explosive force, and a commando team stormed into the room, rifles raised and ready. "Nobody move!" The command was sharp, authoritative, absolute. The delegation members froze in shock and confusion. The American representative made an instinctive motion toward his pocket, but a soldier immediately grabbed his arm and forced him to the ground with practiced efficiency. A small black box was placed on the conference table and opened to reveal its contents. A slender injection device, meticulously engineered and deadly in its sophistication. The bracelet was removed from the American's wrist and examined closely. Inside its hollow structure was a spring-loaded mechanism containing a needle and what appeared to be a delivery system for liquid poison. Sekou held up the device for everyone to see. his voice filled with cold contempt. "This is not jewelry. This is a killing instrument. One press of the hidden trigger, and the poison concealed inside would inject directly into the victim's hand during a handshake. The toxin would stop the heart within 60 seconds, fast enough that security personnel would assume a natural cardiac event rather than assassination." The tension in the room was suffocating. Soldiers' faces showed the strain of barely controlled anger at how close their president had come to death once again. For President Traoré, this represented confirmation of what he already knew. The enemy was now resorting to the most intimate forms of murder, abandoning even the pretense of deniability. Under interrogation pressure, one of the arrested individuals broke psychologically. In a trembling voice choked with fear and resignation, he confessed, "We've tried everything. Landmines, bribery, threats, coordinated attacks, but he escapes every time, as if protected by forces beyond our understanding. We were told this was the last opportunity, that failure was not an option." Sekou stared into the man's eyes with an intensity that seemed to pierce through all deception. "And do you know why he always survives?" The captured agent remained silent, unable or unwilling to answer. Sekou provided the answer himself, his voice carrying conviction born of witnessed experience. "Because he doesn't fight for himself. He fights for his people. And sometimes nature itself stands in defense of those who serve a just cause." The arrested delegation was immediately taken into custody. Palace security was reinforced to unprecedented levels both inside and outside the grounds. Embassies throughout the capital erupted in frantic activity as the news spread. International media picked up the story within hours. Assassination attempt on Burkina Faso president foiled, poison concealed in diplomatic bracelet. That evening, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared on television once more. The setting sun provided a dramatic backdrop as he faced the camera, a man who had just defeated yet another attempt on his life and seemed to grow. Stronger with each survival, he spoke with measured intensity. "They call us weak, but weak people don't survive repeated assassination attempts. Weak people don't expose traitors within their own palaces. Weak people don't write their history alongside silent animals and the courage of everyday citizens who refuse to bow to foreign intimidation." He paused for dramatic effect, then continued with renewed force. "Today we buried another conspiracy. This is not just a battle for my life. This is a struggle for our sovereignty, for our freedom, for our future. And in this struggle, no power, no matter how wealthy, how armed, how connected, will make us kneel." His tone was heavy with emotion, but unwavering in conviction. Following this address, not only throughout Burkina Faso but across West Africa, a wave of inspiration and courage swept through populations long accustomed to feeling powerless against foreign manipulation. People understood that no matter how clever or resourced the enemy might be, they could not easily eliminate a leader who had become a symbol of resistance. This was no longer about one man. It had become a movement, an idea that transcended individual survival. From the palace balcony, looking down at the illuminated city below, President Traoré felt as if the lights themselves were pledging protection. Yet he also knew, with the certainty born of experience, that the enemy would not accept these failures gracefully. The next attack, when it came, would likely be even more sophisticated and dangerous than anything they had attempted before. After the poisoning attempt's failure, the atmosphere within the palace settled into a deceptive calm. But President Ibrahim Traoré understood that this quietness was an illusion, a temporary pause before the next storm. The enemy was no longer fighting in open battlefields, but striking from within the walls of trust, wearing masks of loyalty while preparing deadly blows. This reality forced the president to take a step unprecedented in Burkina Faso's history. That night, a clandestine meeting was convened in the palace's most secure inner chamber. Only 5 people were present: President Traoré, Sekou, Chief Guard Karim, the head of cybersecurity, and one trusted advisor whose loyalty had been tested and proven over many years. The doors were sealed, windows blocked, and the room's network completely isolated from the outside world, a digital fortress where secrets could be discussed without fear of electronic surveillance. President Traoré placed his hands on the table and spoke in a low but determined voice. "We've been operating from a defensive position, and that is our greatest weakness. The time has come to defeat the enemy at their own game." Sekou looked at him questioningly. "What do you mean, sir?" The president wrote 3 words on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Operation Vigilance. A brief silence filled the room as everyone absorbed the implications of this name. The president explained his vision with clinical precision. "The purpose of this operation is continuous vetting of every person within the palace, government, and security apparatus. Every employee, whether they're guards, kitchen staff, drivers, cleaners, advisors, everyone's activities will be monitored comprehensively. Every relationship, every phone call, every email, every meeting will be recorded and analyzed. Most importantly, oversight of each department will be assigned to a different department, ensuring no single person holds complete control over any critical function." Karim spoke cautiously. "Sir, this will make everyone vigilant, certainly. But won't it also create an atmosphere of mistrust within the palace?" President Traoré's response was immediate and uncompromising. "The time for blind trust has ended. From now on, only truth and demonstrated loyalty will remain. Trust must be earned continuously, not assumed." The cybersecurity head proposed establishing a new covert command center within the palace, from which not only the palace but all critical government offices throughout the nation could be monitored in real time. President Traoré immediately approved the initiative. "One more thing," the president added with emphasis. "From this point forward, every attack, every conspiracy, every attempted deception will be revealed to the public. We won't show the enemy that we're vulnerable. Instead, we'll demonstrate that each assault only makes us stronger, more unified, more determined." This strategic approach represented a radical departure from traditional politics, where governments typically concealed conspiracies to prevent panic and maintain an illusion of stability. But President Traoré had decided that complete transparency would serve 2 crucial purposes. The population would become aware of external threats and internal traitors, and every potential betrayer would know that exposure was inevitable. The very next day, Operation Vigilance commenced with systematic thoroughness. Hidden cameras, microphones, and digital trackers were installed throughout the palace. Covert intelligence agents were embedded among regular staff. Guards were rotated on unpredictable schedules, and everyone, regardless of rank or tenure, faced surprise interviews and background checks. Within days, the first results emerged. A kitchen worker was discovered maintaining covert communications with a foreign embassy, passing information about the president's schedule and dietary habits. A junior guard had been photographing palace interiors with his mobile phone and transmitting the images to an external contact. Both were immediately arrested. President Traoré personally announced these arrests on national television, sending an unmistakable message. From this moment forward, anyone, whether inside the palace or outside, found participating in conspiracies against Burkina Faso will have their name, face, and crimes presented to the public. There will be no secret trials, no hidden punishments. Betrayal will be exposed in the full light of day. This message resonated deeply with the population. Throughout cities and villages, people began saying that their president wasn't just surviving, he was winning a new victory against the enemy every single day. The transparency created a sense of shared struggle, a national unity forged in the crucible of repeated attacks. On the other side of these developments, Western embassies grew increasingly anxious. Their agents and covert connections were being systematically identified and neutralized. Some operatives immediately fled the country. Others fell silent, perhaps waiting for new opportunities or receiving instructions to lay low until the heightened security measures relaxed. Sekou reported one evening with a satisfied but cautious tone, "Sir, the West is no longer attempting direct contact with you. They understand that your every move is under public scrutiny, that the population watches and supports you. They can no longer operate with the invisibility they once enjoyed." President Traoré regarded him with penetrating insight. That was precisely the objective, to make it impossible for them to breathe easily on our soil. to turn our nation into hostile territory for covert operations. Yet beneath his outward confidence, the president knew the war was far from over. The enemy was merely preparing their next move, and that move would likely be more dangerous and sophisticated than anything attempted previously. The forces arrayed against African sovereignty had vast resources, decades of experience, and no intention of accepting defeat in this crucial theater of geopolitical competition. 2 weeks had passed since Operation Vigilance began its comprehensive security sweep. Every person within the palace was now subject to scrutiny, their movements tracked, their communications monitored. President Ibrahim Traoré spent his nights in a secure room, reviewing classified intelligence reports that painted an increasingly complex picture of the threats facing his administration. That particular night, a report arrived that created deep furrows across his forehead as he read its extraordinary contents. The report had come through Sekou's hands, who entered the room, offered a formal salute, and quietly placed the file before the president. "Sir, you need to read this yourself." President Traoré opened the file. The first page stopped him cold. The report concerned a young shepherd living in a small village 2 days' journey from the capital. The shepherd had reported that one of his cows had mysteriously disappeared for 2 days. When it returned, the animal had red markings on its horns and a burn scar on its rear leg. According to the shepherd's statement, the cow had been unusually subdued after returning, quite different from its normally active behavior. Typically a social animal that stayed with the herd, it now wandered alone, as if traumatized by some terrible experience. The shepherd stated with complete certainty that this was the same cow that had blocked the presidential convoy's path. President Traoré looked up at Sekou. "Have we verified this?" Sekou nodded affirmatively. "Yes, sir. We've arranged to bring this cow from the village to the palace secretly. No one along the route knows why it's being transported." The following morning, the cow was present in a specially prepared shed behind the palace. A team of scientists, veterinary doctors, and forensic experts had been waiting since dawn. President Traoré arrived personally to observe the examination. The cow stood with remarkable composure, but its eyes held that same deep, knowing quality, as if it understood everything but could not speak, as if it carried secrets locked behind its gentle gaze. The examination began with meticulous care. Experts collected samples of the red substance on the horns, took tissue samples from the burn mark, and documented fine scratches across the animal's body. Each finding was photographed, cataloged, and prepared for laboratory analysis. The most shocking discovery came when one expert found small dried blood spots on the cow's hide. Laboratory tests proved the blood was human, not just human, but from an adult male. The blood wasn't fresh, but several days old, dating to approximately the time the cow had been missing. President Traoré drew a deep breath as the implications settled over him. So someone tried to remove this cow or harm it, and during that struggle it was injured. "But whose blood is this?" Sekou nodded grimly. "Exactly, sir. My assessment is that when they planted the landmines, this cow accidentally wandered onto the scene. They attempted to drive it away, perhaps even kill it to clear the road, but somehow it escaped. Then, at precisely the right moment, it returned and stood in the middle of the road, almost as if guided by purpose beyond animal instinct." President Traoré gazed at the cow with something approaching reverence. "This doesn't feel like coincidence, Sekou. This feels like a message, like something beyond our understanding intervened." Sekou's voice dropped lower. "Sir, there's another part to this message." "What do you mean?" "We've received intelligence through covert channels that they're coming again. This time, they won't bring weapons or plant explosives or use drones. Instead, they'll wear the face of friendship and diplomacy. They'll come with smiles and peace offerings, but their intentions remain lethal." President Traoré allowed himself a slight smile. "Then we must respond in the same language, but with our own trap prepared." Over the following 3 days, a covert plan was methodically developed. An invitation was extended for a friendly meeting with another foreign delegation. In reality, this invitation was carefully constructed bait. Every member of the upcoming delegation underwent comprehensive background investigation. Their travel route would be monitored at every stage. The palace conference room where they would meet was saturated with hidden cameras and sophisticated audio recording equipment. President Traoré understood that this wouldn't be the enemy's final attempt, but it represented an excellent opportunity to intercept their next move before it could be executed. The cow's story had evolved from mystery into symbol, a sign that the land itself, that nature, and perhaps divine providence were aligned in this struggle for sovereignty. When President Traoré returned to his office, he stood at the window and looked down at the lawn where the cow grazed peacefully, as if all the secrets of the world were hidden behind its gentle eyes and calm demeanor. He murmured under his breath, "The day you blocked my path, the enemy's game changed forever. You weren't just an animal in the road. You were a guardian sent by forces we may never fully understand." Months of tension, conspiracies, and narrow escapes had passed when the day arrived that would take this story to a new level of international attention. In Mali's capital, a summit of African leaders was convened, an important gathering where heads of state from across the continent would discuss regional security, economic cooperation, and the growing pressure from external powers seeking to maintain their historical influence over African affairs. Media personnel, ambassadors, and political analysts from around the world focused their attention on this assembly. President Ibrahim Traoré's entrance into the conference hall created an immediate stir. Cameras flashed like lightning as he walked with dignified bearing and confident steps that commanded respect. He took his seat at the center of the main table. But his mind was occupied with memories from recent months. The cow standing in the road, the hidden landmines, Idrissa's betrayal, Domba's tracker, the poisoned bracelet, and the implementation of Operation Vigilance that had systematically dismantled enemy networks within his own government. During the proceedings, a foreign journalist grabbed the microphone and asked a direct question that cut through diplomatic formalities. "Mr. President, a story has become famous worldwide that a cow saved your life. Do you actually believe this?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Some attendees exchanged amused glances and whispered comments, but President Traoré's face showed neither embarrassment nor defensiveness. He leaned toward the microphone with complete composure and spoke in a voice that carried deep conviction tinged with profound wisdom. "Yes, a cow saved my life. But the real miracle wasn't the cow itself. The real miracle was the truth it exposed. That cow revealed the depth of betrayal surrounding us, showed us that there are people who smile to our faces while plotting our destruction behind closed doors. That animal demonstrated something we must never forget. That threats come not always from obvious enemies, but often from those we trust most." Complete silence descended upon the hall. President Traoré continued, his words gaining momentum and power. "Miracles happen when you learn to listen to the pulse of the earth. The land speaks if you're prepared to hear its voice. That cow standing in the road was a message from the soil we walk upon, from the ancestors who gave their lives for this land, from the future generations whose freedom depends on our courage today." His words carried such depth and authenticity that after a moment of stunned silence, the entire hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, offering not just polite diplomatic acknowledgement, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. This wasn't applause for one man, it was recognition of an idea, an approach. A model of leadership that refused to submit to the old patterns of control and manipulation. The response transcended the conference hall. Back in Burkina Faso, public love and support for their president reached unprecedented heights. In the capital's central square, a magnificent new monument was unveiled, a bronze sculpture of a brown cow with golden horns gleaming in the sunlight. Beneath the statue, a plaque bore the inscription, "When the world tried to bring him down, he stood firm." This monument wasn't merely a memorial, but a symbol of resistance, unity, and faith in forces beyond human machination. Children visited on school trips, listening to teachers explain the story with the gravity usually reserved for ancient heroes. In villages across the nation, elders recounted the tale as if it were legend, yet every word was documented truth, every detail verified by witnesses. The story's impact spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In Mali, Niger, Guinea, and other African nations, people began speaking with pride about how one African president had not only resisted foreign conspiracies, but had transformed each attack into a source of national unity and strength. Young people painted murals in city streets. Poets composed verses. Musicians created songs celebrating this strange convergence of danger, survival, and mysterious intervention. But the enemy had not grown silent. Across the ocean in Europe and America, behind closed doors in conference rooms and intelligence facilities, new strategies were being formulated. The previous approaches, assassination, bribery, internal subversion, had all failed spectacularly. Now, more subtle and long-term approaches were being considered. Economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, media campaigns to undermine the president's credibility. Yet President Traoré understood that the battlefield had fundamentally shifted. He no longer stood alone, but was supported by an awakened population that had witnessed repeated attempts to eliminate their leader and had seen him survive and grow stronger each time. The transparency of Operation Vigilance had created a national consciousness, a collective vigilance that made covert operations exponentially more difficult. One evening, standing on the palace balcony and gazing down at the city where people were gathering for a spontaneous celebration, Sekou approached and spoke quietly. "Sir, the people now have complete faith in you. But that also means the enemy might attempt extreme measures, something we cannot anticipate." President Traoré responded with measured wisdom. "And we will respond to every assault with even greater strength than before, because this is no longer about my survival alone. This has become about our collective future, about proving that African sovereignty is not a dream, but an achievable reality defended by determination, unity, and the will to resist regardless of the cost." Below, in the celebrating crowd, a child asked his father, "Papa, did a cow really save the president?" The father smiled and knelt to his son's level. "Yes, my child, but remember, it didn't just save a life. That cow reminded us of our strength, our connection to this land, and our duty to stand together against those who would control us. That animal was a teacher, showing us that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that we must always remain alert, always trust our instincts, always question what we're told to accept without thinking." Throughout Burkina Faso's streets, an extraordinary atmosphere of pride and determination had taken root. This was the same land where foreign powers had once played their games with impunity, treating African nations as pieces on a chessboard to be moved according to external interests. But now this land was governed by a leader who refused to bend, refused to be bought, refused to accept the old rules that had kept Africa subjugated for generations. The foundation of this transformation rested on a story that made some people marvel and others laugh in disbelief. A cow saving a president's life. Yet for the people of Burkina Faso, this was no absurd tale but a powerful symbol, a sign that nature itself, that the spirit of the land, and perhaps divine providence stood aligned with their struggle for genuine independence. The golden-horned cow statue in the capital's central square became a pilgrimage site. People visited daily, children having their photos taken beside it, elderly citizens offering prayers of gratitude, young people gathering beneath it to play music and discuss politics. The inscription on the statue's base compelled every visitor to pause and reflect. When the world tried to bring him down, he stood firm. These words applied not only to President Ibrahim Traoré, but to every person who had ever refused to submit to pressure, threats, or temptation. For the president personally, this phrase represented more than military victory. It embodied a national lesson about integrity under fire. In his office, President Traoré had mounted a photograph of the cow on the wall. Whenever he faced a difficult decision, he would look at that image and remind himself, "Truth and vigilance don't weaken us. They protect and strengthen us." That animal taught us to trust our instincts, to question what seems convenient, to investigate what appears suspicious. Operation Vigilance continued its systematic work. Every employee, every government official understood that their activities were subject to review. The population received detailed briefings about major conspiracies, whether involving internal traitors or external aggression. This unprecedented transparency not only increased public trust, but created significant difficulties for enemy operations. After 1 year, foreign military installations in Burkina Faso had been almost entirely eliminated. Diplomatic relations now proceeded on the basis of equality rather than coercion or bribery. Young people throughout the nation spoke with pride about how their president had confronted and defeated some of the world's most powerful covert networks. But President Traoré remained realistic about the ongoing nature of this struggle. One evening, Sekou delivered a sobering intelligence assessment. "Sir, we've learned through classified channels that rather than targeting you directly, they're now preparing to attack the nation's economy, attempting to destabilize through financial pressure, trade restrictions, and coordinated international sanctions." President Traoré, seated in his chair, drew a deep breath and spoke with characteristic determination. "Then we strengthen our foundations. We saved the land from direct assault. Now we must protect its productivity, its economic vitality, its capacity to sustain our people independently." He initiated direct meetings with farmers, manufacturers, and young entrepreneurs. The population received a clear message. National security isn't maintained only at borders, but in fields, schools, factories, and marketplaces. Economic independence was as crucial as military defense, perhaps more so in the modern era where warfare often took economic rather than kinetic forms. Over time, this story spread throughout other regions of Africa. In Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even North African nations, people began saying, "If Burkina Faso can defend its sovereignty, why can't we?" The example became contagious, inspiring similar movements toward genuine independence and rejection of neo-colonial arrangements that had persisted decades after formal decolonization. One day, President Traoré visited a primary school in a rural area. During a question session, a small child raised his hand with innocent curiosity and asked, "Mr. President, when that cow stood in front of you, were you afraid?" The president smiled warmly and approached the child, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. He knelt to eye level and spoke with the patience of a teacher addressing the next generation. "Yes, for a moment I thought it was just an animal blocking the road, creating an inconvenience. But then I listened to an inner voice. Some people call it instinct, others call it wisdom, and that voice said, 'Stop, something is wrong here. Investigate before proceeding.' My child, sometimes in life you must listen to what your eyes cannot see, to what your mind knows, even when it cannot explain how it knows. That cow taught us all a valuable lesson about trusting those deeper sources of knowledge." The child nodded solemnly, and the entire school erupted in applause. This story had transcended its specific details to become a parable about vigilance, about trusting instinct, about refusing to ignore warning signs merely because they come in unexpected forms. The narrative had evolved into legend, yet remained grounded in documented fact. It represented a promise that Africa would protect its land, its dignity, and its people. No matter how powerful the adversary, the continent would no longer passively accept domination. Each time someone passed the cow statue in the central square, they reflected privately that perhaps nature itself stood ready to defend those who fought for justice, for sovereignty, for the right to determine their own destiny. The lesson was simple but profound. One must listen carefully, observe vigilantly, and trust that truth has a way of revealing itself to those prepared to see it. For President Ibrahim Traoré, this extraordinary story remained a constant reminder that true strength lies not in weapons or military force alone, but in unity, faith, and unwavering vigilance. These were the principles he repeated in every speech, every meeting, every policy decision. "We are people who can hear the earth's voice," he would say. "And when the earth speaks, we stand ready to defend what it tells us, to protect our sovereignty, our dignity, our future." The cow that blocked the road had become more than an animal, more than a lucky coincidence. It had transformed into a living symbol of resistance against forces that sought to control Africa through covert means, to eliminate leaders who dared to speak of genuine independence and continental unity. Years would pass, and the story would be told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding while preserving the essential truth. Children would grow up hearing about the day a simple cow exposed an international conspiracy, saved a president's life, and changed the course of their nation's history. The monument in the Capitol Square would stand as a permanent reminder. Vigilance is not paranoia. Caution is not weakness. And sometimes the most important warnings come from the most unexpected sources. The golden-horned cow, frozen in bronze, would watch over the city as a guardian spirit, a symbol of that moment when destiny, nature, and human courage converge to protect not just one man, but an entire nation's dream of true freedom. And in presidential offices, in village squares, in schoolrooms across Burkina Faso and beyond, people would continue to share the wisdom embedded in this remarkable tale. Listen to the land. Trust your instincts. Stand firm against those who would dominate you. And remember that resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it comes through military strength, sometimes through economic independence, and sometimes through the simple courage of standing in the middle of a road and refusing to move until the truth is revealed. The cow had saved more than a president's life. It had awakened a nation to the reality of threats they faced and to their own capacity to recognize and resist those threats. It had demonstrated that sovereignty is not granted by others, but claimed and defended by those with the courage to say no to manipulation, regardless of how powerful the manipulator might be. This was the true miracle, not that an animal blocked a road, but that a nation learned to see clearly, to act decisively, and to stand together in defense of their hard-won independence. The cow had been a teacher, and Burkina Faso had been an attentive student, learning lessons that would echo across Africa for generations to come. The end.